our hearts. And the invitation here is, we've come from a very beautiful space and an offering today morning, where we invited the energies of everything that's around us. The plants, the trees, the fishes, the water, the Creator. And there's so much to feel grateful and gratitude. And I'm going to invite you today to each one, while we will have debates and discussions, our hearts may go through a lot of wounds, and it may be torn open. I'm going to invite you to just sit with that today and to listen, to offer. And one of the things that really melts the heart is the art form, the music, the dance, the chants. In fact, today when you look around over here, this is an artwork of a gentleman from Auroville. His name is Pierre Legrand. And the theme of the artwork that is being displayed here is called Life and Matter, or spirituality and matter that can alter life and environment. And this is his way of experiencing that force and that. So today we start off with an offering of another form that brings us closer to the divine, the form of dance. Yogini is grace embodiment of that divinity. For me, she's one of the few dancers who perform two Indian classical dances. One is the Kathak and Odissi, with the same deftness, with the same virtuosity. She has had the benefit of receiving the guidance from Pandit Birju Maharaj and Guru Kelucharan Mahapatra, and they're the best in the worlds of Kathak and Odissi. I know that because I had the benefit of doing a workshop with Kelucharan and Mahapatra. And you could just see how a wink or even a movement of an eyebrow spoke so much. So today, that's what you will have to see in Yogini. It's not the form, it's what she experiences and expresses through the form. She has traveled extensively, performed across the world. So without much ado, inviting Yogini, who offers in the context of the spiritual force, the grace of the gurus, the grace of dance, to flow through her. Over to you.
Good morning to each one of you. It is indeed my pleasure and privilege to be amidst this very august gathering. Friends, all systems of knowledge rooted in the ancient Indic wisdom were created for one purpose alone: to help us return to the source, to merge with the supreme consciousness. Classical music and dance are very powerful mediums to give us an experience that I am not. For me, dance has been a form of dynamic yoga, and my journey continues inward with an outward expression. I present before you Advait, a piece very close to my heart, where I have attempted to delineate the concept of non-duality. Here, if we notice how a seed, a tiny seed, grows into a vast tree, bears flowers and fruit, the essence of the seed and the tree is the same. Similarly, the waters of the ocean turn into vapor, form clouds and rain, and return to the ocean. There is a common sense of immortality that we see around us. And it is this element of nature that we are all a part of. So in the beginning, there is an inquiry that if there is childhood, youth, and then death, Why is there birth at all? And that's where we see this cyclic element in nature of which we are an integral part. But if everything returns, where does this cycle of life and death end? As we all are aware, human beings are a mere microcosm of this vast macrocosm. And when the mind matures, it sees the senseless differentiations. Dvait or duality leads to Advait, non-duality. To further reiterate this concept, I have chosen verses by Adi Shankaracharya, where he says, I'm neither mind nor chitta, ego nor the senses. I am the eternal Shiva element, pure blissful consciousness, Chidananda Rupaha, Shivoham Shivoham. I'm neither earth nor sky. For me, there is no virtue nor sin. Dharma, Kam, Artha or Moksha are not for me. For I am the eternal Shiva element, the pure blissful consciousness, Chidananda Rupaha, Shivoham Shivoham. For me, there is no bondage or salvation. I'm omnipresent, all-pervading, forever balanced. For I am the eternal Shiva element, pure blissful consciousness, Chidananda Rupaha, Shivoham Shivoham. I shall conclude with a piece, with a shloka from the Upanishads, which says that when you remove the whole from the whole, you are still left back with the complete whole. I humbly offer to this gathering Advait.
सोऽहं हंसो ब्रह्मैवाहं शुद्धानन्दस्तत्त्वपरोऽहम् अद्वैतोऽहं सङ्गविहीने इन्द्रिय आत्मनि निखिले लीने।
मनोबुद्ध्यहङ्कार चित्तानि नाहं न च श्रोत्र जिह्वे न च घ्राणनेत्रे न च व्योमभूमिर्न तेजो न वायु
चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं न च प्राणसंज्ञो न वै पञ्चवायु न वा सप्तधातुर्न वा पञ्चकोशः न वा पाणिपादो न चौपस्थपायो चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम्
न मे द्वेषरागो न मे लोभमोहः मदोर्नैव मे नैव मात्सर्यभावः न धर्मो न चार्थो न कामो न मोक्षः
चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं न पुण्यं न पापं न सौख्यं न दुःखं न मन्त्रो न तीर्थः न वेदा न यज्ञः अहं भोजनं नैव भोज्यं न भोक्ता चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम्
न मे मृत्युशङ्का न मे जातिभेद पिता नैव मे नैव माता न जन्मा न बन्धुर्न मित्र गुरुर्नैव शिष्यः
चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम् अहं निर्विकल्पो निरामयो सर्वत्र सर्वेन्द्रियाणां सदा मे समत्वं न मुक्तिर्न बन्धः
चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहं चिदानन्दरूप शिवोऽहं शिवोऽहम् ॐ पूर्णमद पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ शान्ति शान्ति
Thank you for that. I'm neither this nor neither that. Who am I? I guess we are all on that journey, and it is that journey that brings us here. Thank you for that beautiful context, Yogini. I think it was a beautiful rendition of the Advaita, and for allowing us to soak into that and allowing us to feel that vibrations of this form. So thank you so much. And to deepen this even more, where you saw something visual, now you will listen through your ears and feel it and soak it. I'm inviting Martin Hosh from the Shinoyan Buddhist tradition of Japan, who is now going to continue from here. And all that we do is offer our presence.
祀る残儀残下六根在消滅常煩悩滅上五正さらばたぎゃたはなまんなのきゃろみナモタッサバガワトアラハトサンマサンブラサナモタッサバガワトアラハトサンマサンブラサナモタッサバガワトアラハトサンマサンブラサTam saranam gacchami dhammam saranam gacchami sangam saranam gacchami dutiyampi buddham saranam gacchami dutiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami dutiyampi sangam saranam Gacchami tatiyampi buddham saranam gacchami tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami tatiyampi sangam saranam gacchami panati pata vedamani shikapadam samatiyami Hadinadana vedamani sikapatam samatiyami kame sumichachara vedamani sikapatam samatiyami musavada vedamani sikapatam samatiyami Sulamedaya Madhapamadhattana Vedamani Sikapatam Samatiyami Usetsu maka hanya hadamita shingyo Kanji zaibo sagyo jin hanya hadamita jisho kengo unkai ku Hissai ku yaku shari shijiki hui ku ku hui shiki shiki zokuze ku ku sokuze shiki ju sogyo shiki yaku bunyo Shari shize shoho kuso fu shohu mezu fu ku fu jo fu jo fu gende koku tsumu shiki muzu sogyo Mugen bibize shinni mushiki shoko mizoku ho mugen kai nai shi mu ishiki gai mu mu myo yaku mu mu myo jin nai shi mu ro shi yaku mu ro shi Fukushu mezu do mushi yaku mu zoku imu shodoku bodai sattae hanya aramita koshin mukege mukege Fukuhu ondi saiten do musoku gyo ne hasande shobutue hanya aramita Kodoku wa nukutara samyaku sambodai koshi hanya haramita zerai jin zerai myoju zemu joju zemu dodoju jissai fu shinjitsu fu koko desu hanya haramita Jushoku seshu wasu gyate gyate hara so gyate bodhi soaka hanya shingyo Miyobiru shana 在魔界縁潜在潜在大地経前の縁で四白金庫主たらかじ自死最小公者一世諸魔不の解読不法さ最小異様小七道普及一世上来九法さ教作上司小設置で自社死生主解体換気新主公広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ広さだ不動明軸のご霊樹の幕三万だばさらだせんだまかどさらやそあたやうんたらたかまんの幕三万だばさらだせんだまかどさらやそあたやうんたらたかまんの幕三万だばさらだせんだまかどさたやそあたやうんたらたかまん女ぼきゃべろしゃのまかぼだらまにはんどまじんばらはらばりたやうん女ぼきゃべろしゃのまかぼだらまにはんどまじんばらはらばりたや女ぼきゃべろしゃのまかぼだらまにはんどまじんばらはらばりたや女ミリタ訂正から女ミリタ訂正から女ミリタ訂正からナム共同院ナム神道院ナム小樹神院ナム信用教主ナム信用慶主長寿三ナム信用ナム信用ナム信用ナム信用ナム信用大根後リンダラニノマクシチリアジビキアナンサラバダタギャダナンナンビラジマカシャキャラバジリサタサラテイタライタライビダマニサンバンジャニ タラマジシッタギリアタランソアカノマクサンマンダボタナンボロンノマクサンマンダボタナンボロンノマクサンマンダボタナンボロン願わくはこの功徳をもってあまねく一切に及ぼし我らと主上と皆共に仏道を上善ナムシンニョイチニョトトトキミホトケオネンジタテマツルザンギザンゲロコンザイショ滅上煩悩滅上五章サラバタタギャタハンナマンナのキャロミ
That's a beautiful segue to our first session of the day today, the science of sound. And I'm sure you felt the vibrations of the sound and how powerful these sounds can be to take to a deeper space in our heart. Some of these sounds are heard, but there are sounds that are unheard, and they can be really powerful. Our ancient, the higher seers, knew about the power of these sounds, and they leveraged the sounds to alter the created worlds across different realms. And for that, they gave us the power of mantras. Today, we use power of the mantras mainly to concentrate during our meditation sessions and a whole lot of other things. But can sounds help us to advance the human community, the consciousness, to the awakening that needs to be accelerated for all forms of life on earth to thrive? So to facilitate this session, we're having a dialogue between Dr. Sampadanda Mishra. I know how you feel that. Lama Tunle Tarshin. He's come from the Maitripai Institute, the Bokran Nathron Chokraling Monastery from Tibet, India. And this session is going to be moderated by none other than Martin. Yeah, that was the sound to be heard. Because sometimes we need a sound to come back into this present world, taking on from the last night's conversation. Lama has requested, Lama, your name? Lama Chikme, because he feels that his English is not so good and he would need help with the translation. So I said yes, but I also said he would be heard and listened to anyways. So anyways, give them a big welcome. And there will be additional remarks by Dr. Nirdesh Korde, the principal of the Ayurvedic College. And then we close the words and chant by Kenpo Norbu. So the session of sound. I'll get one more. Can you get one more chair? Yeah. Yeah. We'll get that.
So good morning, everybody. As Sudha said so brilliantly, today is more the day after science and mind that we discussed a lot yesterday. Science and matter and time and all that reality that is around us. This day is more focused on how we write all this in our hearts. So we saw the beautiful dance. It was really very uplifting. And we have very distinguished speakers today, so I tried to make it short. Just wanted to do some reflection on the sound. I mean, this session was entitled Science of Sound. I feel it's maybe more like the power, the workings, the impact that sound can have on whatever is around. And preparing for this session, because I'm quite nervous, excuse me, it's my first time I'm facilitating, so, there's always one time, first time in your life, so. In physics, I looked up, they say sound is a vibration that propagates as an acoustic wave through a transition medium, such as gas, which is air, gas, like air, liquid, solid. So that was interesting for me. You need a material, something, environment for sound to be transmitted. So these mechanical waves need a material environment in order to be transmitted. And then, in the human physiology and psychology, sound is the reception of such waves and their perception. So we receive it with our ears, with our bodies, and then how we perceive that sound. And when we look at music, which is a little bit my field, I come from the opera singing, we can see that the perception and the interpretation of music, as well as the emotional impact music has on the listener, is largely influenced also by the cultural background of each individual and his or her personal experience and maybe listening habits. Singing and chanting comes naturally with language. So I go back to my experience in classic opera. I don't know how many of you have ever seen or listened to classic opera. But sometimes the lyrics are not clearly pronounced, so you cannot really understand what is sung, or even it's in a language that you don't understand. But still, you might agree, if you have ever heard an opera aria, like the emotional message comes through the language of the music itself. So when we now look at the religious chants and mantras, there are many cases where those who chant and also those who listen, maybe you as well today, some parts, you didn't quite fully understand the language, either Sanskrit or Pali or ancient Chinese, Japanese, whatever. So these specific words and syllables are not intellectually understood sometimes, but the practice of chanting is said to allow to get in touch with the sacred intent that is imbued in the mantra. And it helps us align our spirit with it and resolve to a mindful action for the benefit of people and the world. And then you have seen, the Lama has brought a chanting bell as well. And I had a chanting bell, I had wooden blocks, I had this Buddhist instruments called shakujo in Japanese. So you might think like, oh, it's kind of nice accessory, sounds beautiful. But the meaning behind is also like that it awakens our mind. Chanting bell is a sound that can awaken our minds, it can focus our attention. And then the rhythm of these Buddhist instruments also, they can that energy that's in there, they're spurring us to action.
which is the next step after meditation and chanting. Let me briefly quote words of Her Holiness Shinzo Ido, which is my spiritual master in Japan. She wrote in Lion's Roar, which is, if you don't know, the American, largely known American Buddhist magazine. And she wrote in 2018, when we practice chanting as a form of meditative prayer, offering it with our whole being, we absorb within ourselves both the sound and energy of the wisdom and compassion imbued in the mantra. And she went on to say, chanting helps align our body, speech, and mind, actions, words, and thoughts, towards becoming a solid foundation to support, empower, and sustain our prayers and actions. So when these mantras are chanted, their sounds go beyond the environs of the chanter. They reverberate and are absorbed within all of us, the chanter and the listener. So in the Shinyo tradition, which is rooted in the Buddhist Shingon tradition in Japan, esoteric Buddhism has the so-called three mysticisms, three parts of mysticism at the center of all ritual practice. It might be a little bit similar to maybe Tibetan Buddhism, but the Lama could talk a little bit more about that probably. When the priest forms traditional hand signs, you might have seen that I changed a little bit the position of the hand. It was just to give you an idea. And those hand signs are mudras, and then the chants that are related, and the mantra that is chanted. So these help to focus in the meditation with body, mind, and mouth, and words to focus on the wisdom and loving kindness of the representations of Buddhahood. So yesterday we heard, I remember very much, it was in Shadalu's session maybe where he said, Sri Aurobindo said, so one human's perfection has an impact on the whole universe, something like that. It reminded me of a quote from our founder, Shinzo Ito, who said, one person's awakening will enlighten countless others. So in that sense, the sound of mantra is one means of communication that can be received intuitively without the filter of the human intellect. And it's a great means to nurture people's aspiration for awakening and spread that from one person to another like ripples on the water. Eventually, impact humanity as a whole. So I don't know if you would agree to all of this, but we might look a little bit closer to your experience. So, Dr. Mishra, I read that you, besides being a specialist and an expert in courses, lectures on the life and the teaching of Sri Aurobindo at the Rishihood University, you're also an expert in Sanskrit. So when I was talking about language and the origins of mantras, there is a lot of Sanskrit in there in mantras very often. So how would you describe the workings, the power of sound, of mantras, or how can they affect the way we look at reality, the way we perceive life around us, and how it can stimulate us to, to evolve to a better version of ourselves?
Namaskar to all of you. Thank you, Martin, for the beautiful introduction. Before I answer or say something about my experience, let me begin with a prayer to Agni. Agne vratapate vratam sarishyami tachhakeyam tanme radhyatam idamahamanrutat satyamupayimi. Agnaye swaha idam agnaye idam namama. Om So chanting and the mantras, prayers are an integral part of my life right from my childhood. For me, what matters is not the sound, but how sound leads to the state of silence, which in fact is the source of all sound. And it is through mantra we become more and more aware of the silence, the supreme reality, in fact, is just the silence. Nishabdam tat parabrahma. So at the highest level, it's just the sound, just the silence. And the sound comes from the silence. And the sound can lead to the state of silence. How it impacts what has been my experience, to tell a little bit. I have been working a lot on the rhythmic patterns called chandas. And when we are talking about mantra, another name for mantra is chandas. So it does happen, though in our classrooms we study the chandas from a very different angle, in a different way, focusing only on the arrangement of syllables and number of syllables. But for me, chandas is has a very different meaning and has different implication. I go deep in silence to meditate upon the various patterns. It happened as I spent maximum time in the nature. So one day I was sitting in a park. There was no wind, all silence, listening to the pure sounds of the birds of the nature. And it happened that a leaf fell from the tree. It was very beautiful to look at how it started and then got settled on the ground. And it was a moment of realization, in the sense that it created a sense of universal cosmic meter. And it was on the same day I was reading future poetry of Sri Aurobindo, where he was, and it was exactly the chapter on mantra, where he has explained very beautifully about this cosmic meter. And it very much resonated with what experience I had few hours before. And that gave me a chance to dive deep into the whole idea of mantra from the chandas point of view. It was not mantra, but it was just chandas, the universal rhythmic movement. And it's from that the whole creation has come. So in that silence, when there is a little kshobha, little disturbance, then you have all the ripples, all the waves manifesting. And this is how the creation begins. And Bhartrihari says, Chandobhya eva vishwamidam vyavartata. That from the chandas comes this whole creation. From the silence comes this whole creation, and that silence becomes sound. Then my association with Sri Aurobindo and the mother, association with Kavyakantha Ganapati Muni and their experiences, it deepened my understanding of the science of sound, science of mantra. And ever since, it has been an integral part of my life. And every sound, as the tradition says, amantram aksharam nasti. There's not a single sound which is devoid of that mantra shakti. And for me, it has become that to listen to the pure sound without any interference, without any interference of the intelligence, without interference of the mind. Just listening to the pure sound without analyzing it. That's mantra, that's Shruti. The mother has very beautifully explained about when she says about how should we listen to music. We don't know how to listen. If one can rise above in a state of silence, listen to the every movement in a music, every note, how it rises, how it falls, what course it takes, that itself starts transforming, that itself starts impacting every part of our being. And so much so, the ancient seers and sages, they felt, they experienced, they realized. When we talk about the impact of sound on the body, but the ancient seers and sages have seen this body as a sound body. They describe it as Gatra Veena. In fact, all the Veena instruments, if you look at different types of Veenas, they are designed as per the human body. Another word in Sanskrit for body is Gatra because it sings, from root gai, to sing. And the ancient seers and sages, they could, as in the introduction, Sudha was mentioning about the unheard sound, the anahata. The japa japa is going on. They could dive deep into every part of our body, or the nucleus of every part of our body, nucleus of every part, everything that exists on this earth, and could hear the sound of everything. And that is the discovery of mantra. That you could touch the core vibration of everything. Everything in this creation has a nucleus, that core vibration, that primordial sound exists in everything. That's why we say, achaitanyam na vidyate. There's nothing which is devoid of consciousness. And the very word mantra itself then becomes, every sound then becomes a powerful tool to heal, to transform, to raise our consciousness. That's exactly is the meaning, the etymological meaning of the word mantra. Man, and tradition has its own etymological sense, mananata trayate iti mantra, that which saves the mind. But there is a deeper etymology from the root point of view. Man means to contemplate, to concentrate. Tra in Sanskrit is a suffix which is used in the sense of tool. Tool, like you have the word netra, coming from the root sound ni, means to lead. It's a tool which leads. And you can create any number of words by using tra. So mantra is a tool for contemplation, a tool, a very powerful tool which brings the mind into a state of silence. And it's only in that state even the mantras can rise, can manifest. When one attains to that deep state of silence, then the mantra can manifest through a Daivarata. And then a Kavyakantha Ganapati Muni could note down the mantras manifesting through the Daivarata. This has been our tradition right from the Veda till date. There has been no age, no time when the mantras are not manifesting. So that has been my association with the sound of mantra. And the impact is felt at every part of the being, how it purifies, how it transforms, how it leads to a state of silence. And in that silence, things manifest. It brings lots of clarity at every level of our being. So that's what I would offer to start with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mishra. I was struck by the situation where you saw the leaf falling, and that had a significance for you. Other people would have just passed by and even don't notice it. So it reminds me of that fact that there was a situation, the rupture of the stillness, the leaf falling, that resonated within you, within what you were experiencing, with what you were learning, with your connection to Sri Aurobindo. So it reminds me also of what yesterday, somewhere in all the scientific, research, it was said that at least the candidates should be neutral. I think it was about mediumship, if I remember well. So it should be at least neutral, not refusing. So, once you as a person resonate with what's going on around, the sound, the happenings. And one thing that struck me also is the stillness. You talked about the silence. Acoustic wave is the follow of compression and decompression, right? So it's a rupture in stillness, so like silence and then music coming out of the silence. It's a very beautiful metaphor. I loved it very much. How would you, from your tradition, from your culture, Venerable Lama,
관계 도제 녀석에 따와 탐제 방배제 탐배체 내던제베 고담달라 장자로 라소 테니 다드링 단다가주 오르발 탭자기 초조 텐티나 초당 애니 종제 자인딜라 안다나시 애니 단다디 톨링디 코딕 칭게 수다라당 테니 마리나르 소베 So
Lama started his speech with the praise to the Lord Buddha, and before he start, now, so this is my first translating. Okay, so it will be, please bear with me on the stage. I would like to greet Tashidele to Dina, the chair of Aurobindo Foundation, and Jayanti, the secretary of Aurobindo Foundation, and would like to thank Maria and Sudha for their wonderful organizing the things and assisting us during this summit, wonderful summit.
Tening didi tanda joshiden go mazug ngela tening azu da ngage tene dang tene tanda rolmuki dadi nyamdo tening azu semte ne tene kamachik nichto singazu dala semte ne tos komjains.
So before I start the talk on the mantras and sound, I would like to play the singing bowl, and I want all of you to concentrate on the sound with the singing once I hit the singing bowl.
다 지당기 ngazu nga 세티 되네 다 nga 세티 된다티 되네 ngazu 예 껴바스 또 스트레시게 요래 되네 예 껴바스나 예 고랑라 지당 ngazu 다 남도 장래대 봐 요래 되 năng 땅 ngazu 그 예기 쪼더버텔라 되네 ngazu nga 또 스타트 샤 샤당 데모 nga절 차도 세네다 예들 약독니 예베차네다 독쇼다 야가당 아주 링고야 개염르다 독쇼네 삼로 당바나 엔다샤 샤당 데모 nga절 차도데 에네 녀모바 독나스도스다 디어레스.
So the meaning of mantra, mantra means man is mind, and tra is to protections. So protection of mind, and when we say protection of mind, protect from what? Protect from the negative emotions of mind. Major ones are like 6 attachments, ignorance, anger, greed, pride, and jealousy. So we don't actually, mind have two qualities, good and bad. So let's not talk about a good one. We are talking about the protection of mind. So we'll just discuss on the negative of the mind and how we can protect it.
다 드네 ngazu nga ke tene dala tene tene ngazu ta kandes chene ngazu nyomongba dosha shedan temo ngaja chado tela kandes ngazu khapte chagure tela kandes kyobge yoresna ene ngazu bena ta bena chi nga da bena sosugun domba yinda da ajang jangde tana ngazu semla pe tan dosha shedan temo ngaja ngazu sem maje pe kabla nga ge da shenji chi domba myang mena ngazu 다 단땡상자고 ngazu recording do stang shabayina ene semla pe shide yongya teang konga grang shingi nubachi do syores anta telang ngazu chintangge 통롤 투롤 텐롤 rectol sene tende shitsigres.
So how, like, and what means we can protect our mind is the mind, when we hear the mantra, when we hear the mantra, the one who hears the mantra, they feel the peace in their mind, and the negative emotions, it just disappears. So the mantra has the power, strength to eliminate the negative emotions. And not just through the sound, mode of sound, but even through like seeing and touching the mantras and just visualizing the mantras. Those are different modes, not just the sound. There are other modes through which we can use the mantra, utilize the mantras.
Tende indo tene ngazu benata sem magena tene ngazu rang shingi ngane na ya shengi yedo mihong ba tsik na zo thaya tang ene luki ne namjun dramen da thaya ene rang la ya magye ba shen la ya madewa tu siyong kyo res.
So if we don't protect our mind, then with the negative emotions like anger, attachments, we not just only make ourselves disturbed, but even our surroundings gets disturbed with this our negative emotions.
제 장가 당 ngazu tanda pena chik ngazu lusem ludang ngani de sheshin tawa pe kibo dan debo yongye chedu en ngazu sem de joba tango wer ta sem de joba tanya la en nga ge nebate en shira ge chimbres.
So to purify our action and our speech, we need to purify our action and through purification of action and speech, then we can that can be done through the purification of mind. So to purify our mind, so we need the mantra. We use the mantra to purify our mind. And once the mind is purified, then our actions and our speech are automatically purified.
다 데라 통롤 sana kaje seyor sana tene ngazu bana chikta danda nge ki danda rishi shwe de tene ngazu sangye tamje ki tene ningji ki ran suk chamba dan sebe da nye tene jere sigi nga o mane peme hong sia de ngazu do sia kyanggi debla thi ba tang tene ta na shin ge ti ane chik tene parla so ba thong ba na ku chulu chik daba yome la ma do ba mi changma ge sem la ya ande thongwa da lam sa chik hide chi ter thu res tela ya thongtrol sen to chal koras.
So mantras, suppose for example, the mantras of Avalokiteshvara, the Lord of Compassions, embodiment of compassions, all the Buddhas. When we see the mantras of Om Mane Padme Hum, the mantras of Avalokiteshvara, were inscribed on wall or on stones, regardless of religion, everyone can feel the bliss and peacefulness merely by seeing the mantras.
다 tene ngazu thongtrol che tene thurol sana ta kar se yor sana tene nga ge drati tene ngazu rol sha thang tenre nyam do tene dang nye bo jabne ngazu khoyong do pena sa che chigla 다 nga kari na to dang ja de de ngazu semla rang shin ge hide yong ge yobe da peje changmagi di peje sorba chigba yong ge ars da chulu khelen da male di 개발 말해서 창막이 디 땡땡이 용거 알아서 나게 자당 로제데 냠도 또 시요용데 셈라랑 신게 롤로 서바지 용거 알아서 온 딜라이네 토tal 시리즈.
So mantra mode of like using the mantras is seeing and hearing, touching and visualizing. So second one, when we talk about hearing, then when we chant mantras with melody and with the instrument, then when we chant the mantras, automatically everyone feel the blessing of the mantras, energy of the mantras. And in that case, when they feel the blessing and the energy of the, then automatically the negative emotions are eliminated.
다 드는 아주 텐롤 세트레스 텐롤 때 되네 반응 아주 다 소소기 삼로라야 애니 람상 삼로 마롱바지 깨서 람상 오 오만에 빼마홍 반응 아주 되네 표준능 된게 되네 직다 만에 되시라기 캡처버레스 지당 표준능 된라 만에 되시라 캡처버레스 다페는 부 조마지 데 조드나 람상 소소기 데베질이야 데스 마종는 부지 데세소나 람상 오 오만에 빼마홍 시그레스 자자 디인도 안 딜라야 당 아주 그 챵바점기 8월 보디 대반도구여 봐. 8월 보디 가서 찍바 이엠바디 디게 아니다 현라야 디 되게 좀 소소 셈라이네. 야 능에 논주쳐서 오만에 빼마 홍선에 셈라야 디 성부 박자 샤워 차서 들 텐롤스기요레스.
And third one, like we remembering the mantras. When we see an ant, small tiny ant, and when we step on it, and at that time we regret, oh, we killed that ant. And usually in our these things, we automatically from our mouth, Om Mane Padme comes out in our Tibetan. Everyone, most of the Tibetans, when they step on an ant or tiny insect, whether it's ant or anything, even like any beings. So in that case, when we say Om Mane Padme Hum, then it have the power, that mantra has the power to liberate that tiny insect. So I'll give an example. This morning, like the tree, the tree in the forest. So we chant, and I think we say there's like in a tree dwells tree deities. So we chant Mane, we chant that. I think that helped the tree maybe further not like that helps the tree from getting, like when it's hurt, usually people gets hurt and anger comes. I hope that has eliminated the anger and seeded the compassion in that. This is my own this thing, not the Lamas. Sorry. Own view.
다 되는 아주 rectal terrace rectal 세야디 답나 나기 되는 아주 사추메롱 상마라야 되네 진기라비야기 누바지요레스.
So the touching, the fourth one is touching. When we chant a mantra and we touch the four element, then that has the power to energize the four element. And like water, like yesterday, the scientific research, they showed the water and material, chocolate, and that has, the mantra has the power to energize, and with energized, whoever takes that, touch that material can feel the bliss and peacefulness within their mind.
제선당아 덴제디 땅아 주바나 디낭네 에네 단다 rectal 세야티 바나가주 직규 chala ngobo tendela chingilamne ene nga zupana ina tela ya tine zeda nga da chaje tinge ji se ju shiserbe chena ta dinre kho ina tunye mangbo chin somgo ure sena ta dinzu yongya la yang nga drangge de khorange semla tine chuma mai be shenpeng ge samlo di enge parto tene onto toko yores tanda nga zupana di ta nga di la lentar ya la pena ta 显了也偏头了，大本来买出弄的是长马郎就经济了过来是，对经济了呢，俺俺台北咱们讲就经济了头要没那样俺大把包的个，俺你有了让先个显了也偏头呀个，俺古弄这等的过的唱过来是。
So when we blessing, when with the mantras, we're blessing the materials. Another most important thing is that we should have a compassionate mind within ourselves. If we have the compassion while chanting the mantras, then that's more effective. It can benefit many beings with that. Though the mantra is effective, but with the compassion mind, with the love and compassion mind to benefit others. If you have that one, the mantra is more powerful and it's more effective.
다드니 녜타디 지당기 답변은 만에도 다 지당가 상마 표현이라 침버리는 만에세야디 되는 아주 가리 만에래야 도토요레스 엄마니 빼메 홍세네 도토요레스 안티 데바잠게 에는 아랑조 탄데 도와 릭톡 세야디 엔 갸고체토요레스 안티 데바잠지바
Mane have 6 syllables. Om, ma, ne, pe, me, hung. So this each syllabus has its own energy to prevent the beings from being born in the 6 realms.
다 딘데기 깨고체야 딘데 레라보요나 아니 마네짱 데데 데나 디그르바세 소수기 삼로라 디치바지 용그레시 에나양 디 가르쳐고 월스나 디네다 디 리리기 디네 아주 당보디 마네데 덤발레데네 소수 교육이 노바리나 땅 아주 출로기 토네 행동당 리당 초단 딘데라 라네데 열스네 쳐버해야데 정말 열스 디 하고 열스 정말 에나야 다가스 행동지라 에는 아주 행동데 뜻도데 엔 딜레페 직다 콜라 동샘 냠제로 방아주 다나슈비 행동을 지금 좀 동샘 냠제시 침버레스 아니 데 지도걸 땅 아주 가르쳐르기 열서나 드라미 레발야 코토 서버지 용거레스 아주 치기 단단 아주 친뇌진 직된데 에는 아란소 미단 백 카탈다 매반 디페 틴 첨부 임바 다 데네 정아주 코토지 용거레스 제가 데인도 나랑도 보이나 데네 야왕 깔모 바기 두지까지라 데네 콜유기 촌도 망보라도 스차르뇽 데인도 엔 다란쇼베 행동데 뜻도도 코토비아레스도 문행에 주문 많이 봤음나네 콜라야 도시 직 탐이야게 너버지데 리도 제가 데인도 아주 직 랑종게 콜유다 미 바르게 제동세야 등아주 직 장네 코토 트여여베디 엔 덴데레샤스
So Lama wants to emphasize on the morning, the forest, about the tree. So we all believe that where in the forest tree, the deities, they dwell. Even in Buddhism, we have that thing. So this morning when I heard that tree will be cut down, I felt like some kind of like sadness within myself, because I've been working for the environment with His Holiness 17 Kamapa Ugen Trilya Doje. And when we did the prayer this morning, I felt that now we all are getting more aware the importance of the environment, because I have been working for the environment, protecting the and connection between the human and the outer world, environments and the animals. Not just the animals, even the trees, water, and all. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Venerable Lama. Very interesting. Would you like to respond a little bit to what we just heard, or how do you feel about it?
Yes, taking it forward from where he ended, the impact of sound on the environment. Yeah, a few years before I was invited to moderate a session on Jal, Jungle and Janwar. So most of the environmental scientists were there and I was the only Sanskrit person sitting there. And I was to moderate, and I shared my experience. It's actually man's ignorance that he thinks that he can protect the nature. So, however, like we keep on planting trees and all kinds of conservation policies and processes, it's not going to save the nature unless and until we transform ourselves. So every thought of ours, every emotion of ours, every word of ours has an impact, a direct impact on ourselves and the environment which lies outside. And this is where mantra, and we have heard many stories, it is shown in the films, it is shown through many anecdotes, that how the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, they respond to the sound, the pure sounds, the mantra, and what impact it has. It's a day-to-day experience, and a lot of scientific research has been done on this. So this is where, like, when we chant something, we contemplate on certain sounds or certain aspects. So it creates even the very contemplation or very thought, very emotion, it creates a kind of vibration. And every vibration is permanent. So that is why our ancient seers and sages, they say it like Anu Bhadra Kratavo Yantu Vishwataha, that let there be no negative vibration, negative thought common to us, because that will have a wrong impact. Because it's permanent. One cannot erase it. So every vibration created remains there, recorded, registered in the Akasha, and one can bring it back through the process, or whoever is open to it can, receive it. Just to give you one example, like when Sri Aurobindo was asked, like how Kavyakantha Ganapati Muni, without knowing English, could understand whatever is read out to him from the secret of the Veda or from any of his writings. So he just listens to the sound and gets into the spirit of it. And Sri Aurobindo replied that whoever is open to the truth can receive the truth. Language is not a barrier. So that's what is mantra. That's what is mantra. that this openness, this silence to the truth, to the higher principles, uh, where the mantra can manifest, the truth can manifest. Yeah. And just to give you a little explanation of what I mentioned in the beginning speech, that this entire body is seen as a sound body, and based on these experiences, our ancient seers and sages have designed a language. The very design of Sanskrit is such that it follows in every aspect the laws and processes of the nature. It's a very organically grown, very consciously designed language. So, if you look at the very Varnamala, the alphabet is a very wrong word to use for Varnamala because alphabet is very limited. So, we use the word Varnamala. So, in Varnamala, the arrangement of sounds, if you see the 50 letters, or now certain letters we have discarded because of the lack of words with those characters. So, we have around 48 sounds practically used in Sanskrit Varnamala, but there are more sounds also. So Tantra speaks of 50 sounds. So it begins with the sound A and it ends with the sound H. And that's where, for individual self, in Sanskrit you have the word aham. Aham is an abbreviation. Adirantena sanyogat ahamityeva jayate. Like you connect the Adi, A, with the Antya, Ha, and you have the word Aham. Like Om, Aham is also a mantra. So when you contemplate, that's why the ancient seers and sages gave so much of importance to the Atma Jnana. Contemplate on yourself. Even repeat the word Aham. It connects you with every sound beginning from A to Ha. And similarly, when aham takes care of all the vowels and consonants, and vowel sounds being prana, being the very life of the Varnamala, life of everything. So the word Om also begins with A and ends with the last vowel U. So someone may question, how is it that the last vowel, like if you look at the physical formation of the sound, articulation of the sound, A begins from the first position and then U completes it, the last position. So in the speech production mechanism, so A is the first sound, first vowel, and U is the last vowel. So combination of that gives you the Om. So Aham and Om, they're equivalent. So one can contemplate on oneself, one can repeat the word aham, om, and the bija mantras like amantram aksharam nasti. Every sound, every primordial sound, every fundamental sound is repeated, is seen, is contemplated upon as mantra, because those sounds have got that potency, that rhythm, that power. They have the power to arouse that mantra shakti in us. And whenever we chant, so what is important is not to get some siddhi. Like there are people, like who are very much into siddhi. Some kind of siddhi should happen, and they can use the siddhi for showing miracles. I can do this, I can do that. But that's not the purpose of mantra. So when we take up the mantra chanting, there has to be absolute sincerity and purity in aspiration. The mantras are taken up for practice, for the purification of ourselves, for the transformation of ourselves. And this is how, when we take up any mantra and we keep on repeating, repetition is necessary. Like he pointed out, that there are so many lives one needs to attain to that level of purification through mantra. In ancient tradition, here we have the purascharana, that repetition, constant repetition of that with utmost sincerity, devotion. For what purpose? The very purpose of chanting the mantra is to arouse the chaitanya of the mantra, the very consciousness of the mantra. And when that chaitanya is aroused, then it takes care of the transformation.
I would like to take that last word, transformation, actually, Because what we heard, I mean, you know, from various aspects, is very much about transformation. We heard about the silence and the sound coming from the silence. That's a trans. And then we were talking about the protection of the mantra, of the negative feelings. So I was thinking about all these modern sound-reducing devices. You know, you have a sound that is disturbing, and then you have the device that catches that sound, that environmental sound, and it produces the opposite in order to kind of come back to silence. And I find this very interesting. You know, we as human beings, we have a lot of negative feelings facing reality. So we try to come back to zero, but actually probably we need to have something very positive to be able to come from negative to zero. So the mantra as the positive power, the sound, and as you said so brilliantly, the body is sound. The body is a structure of resonating cells and whatever. There's a lot of resonance in the body. So our body, mind, and spirit. And I would add to the words of the Lama who said you have to purify the mind to get your words and your actions purified. And I think you can also, maybe you would agree, say like, if you do positive action, that also can come back as that force to purify your mind as well. So it goes maybe both ways. So the positive action, the altruistic action, the action for the sake of people and the world is something that can also help purify your mind and your speech. So I think there's a lot of common ground between the two explanations you gave us. Thank you so much. I don't know if we have time for some questions. Sudha, is that still okay? Please.
So, can you hear me all? And I would like to thank Sampatji, my good friend, and also my teacher of Sanskrit indirectly, and others. And I was extremely benefited by the discussions. In fact, it was very illuminating throughout. But I'd like to add some Aurobindonian or Sri Aurobindo points to what has already been discussed about mantra. So as Sampatji said about rhythm, and Sri Aurobindo stresses on rhythm, because he says rhythm is the most characteristic word, and rhythm is, as he said, is mantra. Now, the mantra can be discovered. It not just the mantra will be static. There are mantras which are static, and in fact, Sanskrit is the God language. And one of the ideas of Sri Aurobindo to write his English is to fuse Sanskrit with English, because one is the global language, Sanskrit, English, and without Sanskrit you cannot make it spiritual. So Sri Aurobindo wrote a language from 1910 onwards, so 1914 onwards, which is like he writes, the Supreme is manifest forever as the everlasting Satchidananda. Now this was not there in the period before Sri Aurobindo, because people were using synonyms for the Sanskrit. Only Sri Aurobindo came and he fused Sanskrit with English, as he has done in Essays on the Gita also, and also in other texts. His English is Sanskritic. Nolinikanto Gupta has said, Sri Aurobindo writes English like the Sanskrit. And in fact, when he speaks of mantra as a rhythmic voyage of self-discovery, he is referring to a discovery which everybody is capable of. And it comes from the secret fountainhead of the spirit. And there is a soul value to it. Mallarmé also spoke of the poetry of silence. Dr. Sampadananda Misra also spoke of silence. He also spoke of it, but Mallarmé couldn't explain what it is. But Sri Aurobindo explained that, well, this is the secret of silence, and there is a secret vibration which has to be discovered. And also he indicates that it is not just in English, but in every language, in every regional language it can be discovered, because ultimately it comes from the secret fountainhead of the spirit of every individual. And so once again, this rhythm can be discovered, and it is as when he couldn't explain these things in the future poetry, Later, when he wrote to K.D. Setna, his letters in the 1930s, he became limpid. That is why he said to Setna, the mantra which I have tried to explain in the future poetry. That means I was not successful. As this Panditji has said that the future
consciousness and from what level of consciousness one. Three intensities. The intensity of a rhythm. First, highest intensity. He says the highest intensity of rhythm, the highest intensity of the thought content, and the highest intensity of the soul's force, the spirit. He says when these three highest intensities they meet, any language can manifest as a mantra. Thank you.
I think that was quite a powerful remark,
Yeah,
and to explain mantra and sound. Martin, if you have something.
I think that's a perfect remark to end, to say like, humans speak in various languages around the world. So the mantra is filled with what the spirit, the mind, the consciousness of that person also like is be able to put into that world. So
yeah, we'll just do that. Just wait.
yeah.
Yeah, it all depends upon again that intensity. Even a song can also be mantra. Any sound can be mantra. So it all depends upon how do you evoke that mantra shakti or mantra chaitanya in whatever medium you are using. Even an artist, a stroke of his brush can be a mantra.
If I may,
Dr. Mishra, one second.
If I may add something about the song. So I would say, as a singer originally, the difference between a song and a mantra for me personally, the song is something that expresses human emotion. It's an empathetic way of transmitting and giving like a mirror to the audience. You're expressing what everybody knows: love, anger, hatred, whatever, all states of, they were talking about the lower realms, the lower six realms. So a song is an expression of human emotion and that interacts with your audience. Mantra is filled with an energy, with an intention, with a consciousness that wants to transmit and to lift up the audience from their human emotions. So basically that's for me personally like the crucial point between. It can become mantra, yes, we agree on that, yeah. It depends on the intention.
My teacher Krishnamacharya has often said that there are certain things which are having this consciousness which should not be sung. For example, the Bhagavad Gita, when you sing it, you bring it down to emotion. Whereas if you chant it with the chandas, you elevate the mind. So it's not just your personal experience.
Can we just hold on to a direct conversation, because yeah, I will. Dr. Mishra, they just wanted you to repeat the three intensities so that there's been quite a bit of an ask.
Yeah, the three
and we'll come back to the question.
Are the intensity of rhythm, the intensity of thought content, and the intensity of the soul's force.
Yeah. Can we just take a couple of questions before we invite Dr. Nilesh, because he's been patiently waiting and he's part of the delegate. So Madhu, and then you, and then I'll come back to you if you still have a question.
Thank you very much for this very brilliant session, all of you. Congratulations. My question is more about origin of mantras, which is a major issue. It is, of course, mantra dishta, as we read in the Vedas, that they saw the mantra. But the origin, all mantras, even Om Mani Padme Hum, or any of the mantras used by other religions, it could be Sufi, in Sufi Islam also, So the origin of that, the transmission that happens from silence to para to Vaikari, I was just wondering whether you could illuminate us on.
Would the Venerable Lama be comfortable answering to that question of the origin of mantras?
What was the question?
The question is like, where does the mantras come from? Where is the origin of the mantras? I mean, there are so many mantras, depends on what mantras we're talking about, but maybe, if you can take your tradition, where does it come from? Where does it start, right?
ngagi chongdang de chidang tanda kongge songdang jigbare chidang anzu ngagi dal tene chidang anzu ta dra thamje nganzu sem tangdang chila dra changma tene ngagi dra tene suk changma lai ki suk oda tene tinje gi ta gomthang chi yore sen de chedu ko dran dini chongdang dine song se tinje gi namsha chi yo mares ko rangshin korang gi 다 가서 랑신 가리나 상마 근데 다이게 랑신 차대 요런 니니 종발에서 근데 가요 말했어.
The mantra actually doesn't exist, that it has been origin from one point. That doesn't. It's actually a creation of our mind. It comes from our mind. Suppose if we like mantra, like when a sound, or like we visualize every beings, if our mind can create the form of charity, actually everyone can, from one who visualize, everyone can be Avalokiteshvara, and all the sound whichever comes, whether it's a creeping of birds, sound of falling paper, everything, that sound can be turned into a mantra, Om Mane Padme Hum. It's what one visualize or what one's in the mind, it creates. So there's no such thing as that mantra is originated from, it comes from somewhere like that. There's no such things.
It reminds me of the words that I have heard from our Buddhist master, that like the Buddhas speak through any sound in the world. So as long as we are capable to listen to it and to take a lesson from everything that we are facing in reality, so that helps us transform ourselves into, something higher. Thank you. There
are a couple of questions. Is it okay if I can hold on to invite Dr. Nilesh and see if he can get answers in that conversation? If not, the two people and one more there who had raised his hands, we can ask the question because we have to head also for the break. So, Dr. Nilesh. Yeah, after this we have a break.
You like to come here.
No, I'm not an expert on sound. But when we study, what we teach is where we are come out of, where is our origin. And as Dr. Meshra said, this is entirely something that sings. We come out of the element of Shabda. If you look at Srishti Utpatti, wherein creation was formed, when Prakriti and Purush decided that they need to expand, the energy needs to expand, Avyakta Mahan Ahankara came out after Mahan when there was an expansion. And after the expansion resulted in an explosion, and this explosion created material. 1 point. Secondly, when our entire existence is based on the Panchamahabhutattvas, the 5 gross elements that we speak about. If you look at the elemental existence, the purest form of existence is sound. Shabda has got individual existence. Rest of the Mahabhutas exist along with each other, intertwined. So Shabda is Shuddha. Shabda is pure. If you look at any change that has to take place, as Sudha has introduced us earlier, for any change to take place at any level, it starts with sound. Beyond that, if you look at the origin of a human being from the sperm and the ovum, what is essential is the conjugation of the sperm with the ovum. The bijas, or the sperm and the ovum, are conditions of Prithvimabhuta wherein everything is condensed together. There is no more space for adding anything into the bija. But once a sperm and a group of sperms around goes and hits the ovum, that is when you start the creation of space within the bija, which allows proliferation of tissues. So it is Shabda that is responsible for creation of space as well as proliferation of tissues. Beyond this, we spoke about mantras. And what is the difference between a human being and other living beings? The basic difference is that anatomically or structurally we are provided with the larynx, and the larynx is the only larynx is the only place which can take in shwasa or take in air and bring it out in the form of a structure. That is akara, which is given to the shabda. Why this is essential now? It is not only Shabda that can make a change, but if you need to make a positive change, we need to use or create our bodies for bringing out Shabda Brahma. Now, Shabda Brahma, what is the difference between mere Shabda and Shabda Brahma? The Shabda Brahma can be created when we concentrate, take in the prana from outside, which again separates out as 5 pranas inside, and out of those 5 pranas, when we bring out a syllable or bring out a word outside, that becomes Shabda Brahma. Technically speaking, if you talk about the 5 vayus, it is only Vyana and Udana vayu which is responsible for creating the sound. But that is mere sound. If your word has to have such a power that it is going to make a change in the life of the other human beings or in the lives of the existing life material around, then what is essential? That you raise your levels of Shabda to Shabda Brahma. And as I said earlier, not by using the 2 vayus that are present inside, but by using the Pancha Pranas to bring out a change within yourself as well as within the existing environment around. That is all that I had to add.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think that's a brilliant last word to say that, everything that we bring as a sound, and we heard that even our action or our simple moving or speaking, whatever action of the body can bring up above resonance in the other and in the environment. So if that's just a simple move, that's a simple move. But if it's with the consciousness of having a positive impact, of being spirited by the universal consciousness. So that can have another impact on our environment. So I think when we were talking about the sound, body is sound. We are looking for transformation. So that's a powerful means for us all to move forward and move higher together. Thank you very much. Thank you to speak.
So 2 quick questions.
Thank you. Since we were talking about mantra, sound, and different languages, I'm surprised that for those who are familiar with Sri Aurobindo, nobody mentions Savitri. Savitri, which is 20,000 verses, which Mother described as a very strong mantric power. And yes, I would like to bring in Savitri, because Mother said, if you want to do yoga, just read Savitri. And if you don't mind, I would like to share 2-3 lines of Savitri. So it's a description of the Divine Mother. Yeah.
We're just waiting for questions right now to this topic. Okay. If you have a question.
It's, the question is, I was surprised that nobody talked about Savitri, which has such a strong mantric power.
I think we heard that every language, can be mantra. So there are so many cases of Savitri and other mantric powers that are existing around the world. So probably we don't have the time today to go over all of those. So, yeah, I'm very sorry for that.
So my question is mantra really confined to the sound space alone, or can we take it to the visual space alone? Like symbols are there. Symbols also evoke certain emotions, certain principles if we just meditate upon it. And so
I think the Lama just before very brilliantly showed that even looking at the stones where the mantra is written or touching upon it, there are other means, material means of touching upon the essence of mantra that is beyond the sound. That is another type of vibration. So I think he already kind of answered your question. Would you agree to that? Sorry?
No, I mean, that's true. Symbols are also mantras. They contain the mantra shakti. That's what I said, that even the stroke of an artist's brush is also a mantra. Depends upon where from it wells out.
The last question.
No, really excellent. Really, it was a very interesting topic, very nicely explained. My last question is about, the bhakti is also, bhakti in the Nama Sankirtanam and all that are there. Nama Sankirtanam, Tiruvachakam, Deva, all those things are also there. So that is, these are also called mantras. Mantras doesn't mean, whatever we could understand from the talk, mantra gives a feeling that is from Sanskrit or something. It's not that way. Mantra is anything which is going to evoke the feelings of people, so that ultimately we reach the divine. So whatever is there, that cannot be called mantra.
Many varieties are there. Many varieties of discovery. Many varieties of discovery are there, and bhakti comes from the psychic being. So it comes from the psychic being.
Can we take a 5-minute stretch?
So it's very clear that sound brings in a lot of animated energy. So, what I'm just going to do is So that was also sound wanting her presence to be felt, right?
Right.
So getting in presence to the energy of it, just inviting the closing words and chant by Kenpo Coaching Norbu. And with that, we'll just do a 5-minute stretch before we move to the next session, which is the individual and the collective.
So I invite you all to take a deep breath, go back to silence, as we heard before we will have the final chant to lift our minds, our consciousness up, and end this session with a positive feeling. Thank you very much. So please take in a deep breath and breathe out. And close your eyes if you want, and just take the sound in. Thank you.
On the auspicious occasion of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, my heartiest greetings to the entire organizing committee and each of all of you. Sri Aurobindo made tremendous contribution in his lifetime, first to India's independence movement, and then to an entire system of spiritual development and education. So I would like to express my gratitude to this organization for promoting his very important work. On behalf of Sarnath International Nyingma Institute, I would like to thank the organizing committee for giving us the opportunity to participate here. And I hope that you will give the opportunity to participate in this way in the future too. Since the very beginning, scholars from a scientific and a spiritual point of view have discussed various topics. I want to thank them, both all of them. And today, Dr. Sampadananda Mishra and Lama Tsultrim Tarchin have elaborated on sound, vibration, and wave of energy. I want to thank both of them on my behalf and then on behalf of Sarnath International Nyingma Institute. I will remain brief and leave without taking too long. So now I'm going to chant and dedicate all merit that we have accumulated through the body, speech, and mind for benefit of all sentient beings. So now I'm going to chant and dedicate. I humble request all of you to join this. No jan so be man ye sar dong bo la yam zen ju ying wen ru nye be ma ju ne she zun dang kor do kan do mam ben kor ke yen je sun dan du ye jin ye lo che she su su guru be ma sin de hong Om Ahom Bandra Guru Pema Sinde Om Ahom Om Jawande nyurdanda uja laman rujun Toa jiya malum bande ya salangwe mbara sho Imau ngasara sanje nawan taye anda Yesu jawa tuje chimbo da Yundo simban tuje tomna la sanje janse pome korje Deje ngosara pato me baye dewa jense jawe shinkande Dashen dine tsewe jurman ta kewa shanje varman chebar Diro kene ananta shalton shon di kenda ye molanta bandi Choje sanje jansen tamje ye kikmen rupar jinje labdosu Tadya tam panja indriya avam bodhana yesohan Jamba pavon jidra kembanda kundu sambo Deshen deda kunjen jesu dalon jen jewan deda tamje rabdungo Chancho semcho rinpoche ma je pana je gyunje Jeba nyamba me baya konne kundum pe warsho Thank you.
And into this presence, given that a couple of minutes ago we talked about the Savitri mantric process, I'm just going to invite you to recite a few lines of that to bring that presence, the mantric presence of those words. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's just 4 lines. The description of the Divine Mother. She is the golden witch, the wonderful fire, the luminous heart of the unknown is she. A power of silence in the depth of God.
The power of silence into the depth of God. Have I got that right? And thank you so much. I know this is a topic very close because we heard different sounds all through the day, all through the time. And we now move into the next leg of our session. Before that, maybe we could just stand on our feet. And let's stretch our hands to reach up. Stretch, lovely. And maybe stand up on our toes. Okay, I'm doing one hand because I got a mic. We use both our hands. Yeah? And then maybe you just want to turn around to your right and say hello to your neighbor. Hi, I'm here. And then turn to your left and say, I'm here too. And then maybe turn around back and do a namaste. I bow down to the divine in you. And then turn back to the front and maybe say thanks to the Mother Earth wherever you can reach, respecting your body, to thank the Mother Earth. And then just embrace yourself, to thank yourself for being such an amazing, amazing body, listening, soaking, and contributing with your vibrations. And that is the next segue to our session, which is the individual versus collective. So we can sit, those who feel like, you want to just go for a couple of second walk and come back because you're delving right into what is called as the individual and the collective. We are told that our personal spiritual efforts bring in benefit to the larger wide. Our actions help stabilize and awaken the collective consciousness. Okay, if everyone is going to go, then we're not going to have anyone here. So the invitation is, maybe I'll give a 1 minute stretch. People are walking. Yeah, we take a 5-minute break and we come back again. Just a 5-minute break. Our speakers are ready for the next session.
help you fast, pass that, go talk to the office. Yeah, I don't know where the other.
And so, welcome back. Let's take a breath in. And as we do a long exhalation, stilling our mind, stilling our body into this moment, bringing all of you in the here and the now, and just connecting with your breath, connecting to the sound, to the silence that is felt here. And we move into our session, which is the individual and the collective. We're told that our personal spiritual efforts bring benefit to the larger whole. And I think that's one reason why we are all here. Our actions help to stabilize and awaken the collective consciousness. And this may operate at many different levels. In the external world, one kind word brings a positive result. It could just be a smile, it could just be a hug, or it just could be a kind act. The deeper our meditative processes, the more we can contribute to the general upliftment of the world, raising our vibration, emitting love. Even without a visible action, we can help advance society. What are the laws that govern this process? The science behind it. And this is the dialoguing that's going to happen. The dialogue between Sriman Adinarayan, I invite you to the stage. He's a co-founder of the Anadi Foundation. Dr. Vinay Chandra Banavati, director of the India Yoga. And Sri Gautam Ghoshal, a student of Sri Aurobindo's teachings and application, but most importantly, member of the Auroville Foundation Governing Board. So for the next 1 hour, perhaps we keep about 50 minutes of dialoguing, and then we can keep 10 minutes to question and answer if there is any. We have a sharp stop at 1 o'clock. Yeah? So thank you so much for being the wonderful audience that you continue to be.
Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
So, good afternoon, everybody. And I won't take long to introduce. Just a few words from Sri Aurobindo on the topic, which will begin the discussion on the collective and the individual. Now, Sri Aurobindo discusses all these things mostly in the human cycle. And there are certain things which overlap from the life divine to the human cycle. Now, he comes in between Marx and Bertrand Russell, the two opposites. Russell was strongly individualistic. In fact, he wrote an essay, The Role of Individuality, stressing that individual should be given absolute freedom. And Karl Marx, you know, he was for the collective. So Sri Aurobindo takes a stand in between them, moderates, and takes them further, because one interesting aspect of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is this, that he never rejects any past writers, any past philosophers. He just brings them forward and take them to the future by illuminating them in the context of the future. So between Russell and Marx, Sri Aurobindo takes a stand And he says that both are important, both have to contribute to the development of a spiritual society. So you can't ignore the individual like Marx did, and you can't ignore the collective, which Russell did. With this note, I pass on to you to start.
Namaste. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. My pranams at the lotus feet of my Guru and Sri Aurobindo and Annai, the mother. They are the guiding force of this space. And we always acknowledge that guiding force. Just as we say you're a human being, we don't refer ourselves to just as a human body or a human mechanism or the human mind. We refer to ourselves as a human being, and that is very significant. So that is the prajna, or the guiding intelligence, or the governing intelligence that we always acknowledge, which is non-physical in nature, non-material in nature. And that governing intelligence does not negate the material. And yet, it is individual in nature. So in that sense, being able to connect with that deep divine within, as is said beautifully in the Yoga Sutra of Maharishi Patanjali, Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha Tada Drashtu Swarupe Vasthanam. Your original Swarupa as the divine awareness, which gets established firmly when we see the Chitta Vrittis, or the various activities of the mind that we are generally aware of, and hence we identify ourselves with it. When we strongly identify ourselves with it, we are that. And yet, we are not that. When they subside, we definitely are something of the nature of drashta, which is also referred to as Sat Chit Ananda Swarupa. And that's what I see in the writings of all great Mahatmas, of all ancient civilizations, which always refer to these. And that also points to the individual. How does that individual awakening actually help in the collective transformation? There, let me place to this August forum my own personal life experience, which has been along that path. Even though it's anecdotal in nature, still it has important value. I was trained in engineering, and for my master's I went to the US. And there, after my studies, I had a spiritual awakening. I was left physically alone for 3 days. My roommates had gone to party for New Year's Eve in New York, Times Square, and I didn't want to go. So those 3 days, I was at a point where my past had ended. I had graduated. My future had not yet begun. Generally, we are caught up in these chitta vrittis of the past or the future. And at that time, I was in the now, where the past was settled. I had no regrets. The future had not yet begun. I had not started dreaming about the future. I had not started planning about the future. And in that space, a deep silence happened. That later, I was already immersed in it. When you're immersed in it, for example, days roll by and you're not aware of it. When you're immersed in it, that's a space almost like if we look at it, there is a great Upanishad called Mandukya Upanishad, and there is a Karika for it. In Mandukya Upanishad, the Avastatraya, or Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti is mentioned, and Turiya. So Jagrat is the waking condition. We are all in the waking condition. We are using the instrumentation of the body and mind to express ourselves, and hence the collective. But as we go deeper in Swapnavastha, we are not using the karmendriyas or the instrument of the body, and yet the mind is active. But then Sushupti Avastha, the body, mind, are they active? But that is considered a divine condition, because you are in touch with the source, and yet it's not active in the manner that we generally recognize, we generally cognize. When we again come back to our regular condition, we wake up after a good night's sleep. All our vrittis, what are called samskaras or vasanas, come forth. Memories come forth. And this is happening day in, day out. Daily it's happening. What is the transformation that it brings about? It's very important aspect. It brings about a transformation. But then, since we are not in a deep conscious connect, not conscious, by conscious I don't mean the conscious mind, but a conscious connect, we have not aspired for it. We just have the past flowing into the future. There is no fundamental transformation that happens. That's where a spiritual process, when an individual undergoes, like the experience that I was describing, that left a deep imprint. After which it was not a past. The vrittis had subsided. But I had no knowledge of such an experience. When my roommates looked at me, they might have mapped me to a person who has a psychiatric disorder, let's say. Because modern psychiatry or neuroscience does not understand these spiritual conditions. No. And that's where the collective, if it does not have appropriate frameworks to approach the individual spiritual experience, then that's a huge limitation for the collective to move forward. Because the individual spiritual, say Mahapurushas like the mother and the Sri Aurobindo, their actions would not have a context or a framework to be appreciated. It would seem like a freak episode of nature, let's say, if we may. But they are not freaks. They are very much part of humanity, very much part of the collective, and that's where we need frameworks to be able to approach it in a meaningful manner. Because otherwise, these experiences, the individual spiritual experiences, can appear like freaks of nature, which have no explanation. More at the at the periphery or outliers. If we need to bring it to the center of human society, then we need appropriate frameworks to be able to explain it. So I was considered a freak. As long as I was agitated, people around me were peaceful. When I became peaceful, everyone got agitated. What's happened to you? What's happened to you? You would have seen, if you meditate in your home, if your family is not appropriately prepared, they don't have frameworks to appreciate that, most probably they will treat you as a freak. No. Gone case, You don't fit in. You're a misfit. And if you don't have the language or the frameworks to appropriately convince them, intellectual frameworks, then you're at a loss. You either have to step out, run away from home, because they would not allow you to proceed, or you'll have to just give up. And both are not options. Similarly, in society, we see if appropriate frameworks are not available for the collective to reason out, then it seems vague at best. Then individual spiritual transformation, for it to be translated, we need those frameworks rigorous frameworks that now science, modern sciences, is trying to unravel. But as I discovered through my own experience, I experienced the state of... So I didn't have the language to express it at that time because I was in that experience. I was immersed in it. That's called pratyaksha. So I did not have the agama or the, it's called the pratyaksha, anumana, agama. I did not have a valid means to explain it to everybody. So I started investing in philosophy, in psychology. I started studying Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras of Maharishi Patanjali, Upanishads. At that time, I also happened to study Life Divine of Sri Aurobindo, and it was a page turner for me. I could not keep the book down. It was like rapid. It was just fascinating. He had figured it out. Similarly, when I encountered Bhagavad Gita, I felt Sri Krishna had figured it out. While the people around me had not figured it out, they could not connect. It was a shock for them to be able to see, how is this person peaceful? Or is this peace that they were dreaming of? Is this happiness that they were seeking? They were also seeking happiness. But is that the condition? So when I started understanding these frameworks and I started expressing it in a language that slowly, gradually they could appreciate, then I started seeing that there are existing frameworks that can inform the collective, that sets an aspirational pathway. Otherwise, what do I aspire for? For example, I went to the US to become a multimillionaire. That was the aspirational context set by the modern educational system, which is informing the collective. What should that individual's aspiration be? This is called Purushartha. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. In Tamil, we call it Aram, Porul, Inbam, Veedu. And Veedu is a very significant concept because it's coming back home, coming to your source. And that is liberating. But you need a framework to be able to appreciate it. For example, many of us, there are various kinds of poverty now. Poverty of food, poverty of love, care, affection. But a bigger problem, I feel, is poverty of inspiration. For many of us, many young people especially, they wake up in the morning, they're like, why should I wake up? There is no purpose to look forward to in life. It's utterly boring. It's like repetitive cycles that one is caught up in, and one just wishes to escape that, but one does not know how.
What is your view on that?
Sabhaye Namaha, Sabhasadbhyo Namaha. At the outset, I'd like to thank the Orville International Advisory Council, its members, its leadership, and the organizers for having put together this wonderful event and bringing us all together, which is actually the topic of this discussion, that's individual and the collective. So that's why we are here, both as individuals and as a collective, to explore some important aspects, what Adir Anandji was referring to, about the frameworks in which we make sense of this transformation, of this growth, and how it extends to the collective as well. I think you put it in a very beautiful grammar so that the discussion can be taken forward from here. I've been looking at what frameworks explain this in a more convincing manner. There are few assumptions we have already made by having this topic. One, there is definitely a mutual influence of the individual and the collective. We are neither in the place of Russell's nor in the place of Marx, excluding the other. So we have made an assumption that, by experience again, that there is a deeper connection, relationship between the individual and the collective, and there is an influence that takes place. Second, for any effect at the collective level, the individual aspiration, which you were saying, aspiration, transformation is absolutely necessary too. So this being given, what are those processes in which this effectively gets translated into the collective? One of the first frameworks that I would like to fall back is on the Sankhyan framework, which is the basis for the entire understanding of yoga, where you have, when the individualization process starts, again, when I say the individualization process here, I'm referring to the Sankhyan framework, which also uses the term evolution and involution, but slightly different from the way Sri Aurobindo puts it. So there the evolution is the Prakriti branching out into the individual. Prakriti, which is one, branching out to the many, is evolution, and the process of returning back, going to the Prakriti, is involution. So there, since this entire, the last set of emergents that we see in this Sankhyan framework, the manas, the karmendriya, jnanendriya, the organs of action, sense organs, and the 5 Mahabhutas and their subtle forms, all these are the expression, manifestation of that same Prakriti. Therefore, whatever happens at the Prakriti level has its influence at the manifested level. Whatever gets touched at the manifested level can somehow move up to the Prakriti level too. That's why we have this very popular statement in the tradition called as Yadyad Brahmande Tat Pindande. Whatever is there at the cosmic level, the same thing can be seen at the microcosmic level as well. So this being the case, the way the samskaras, it is actually right from the mahat and then the ahankara. When the ahankara sets in, it is then the individualization process happens. So these are various layers that cover up the expansion of consciousness and makes it as individualized consciousnesses. So whenever there is a breaking of the ceiling, whenever there is, these coverings are removed, either through a conscious process where it happens through one's own individual sadhana, or through an influenced process where it could happen with the presence of the guru, or in the participation of a ritual, or even in the kind of experience we had initially with the art form. Any art form is that kind of an experience which allows us a momentary passing beyond these layers which cover the core of our consciousness. So these are the various actions through which one can overcome the coverings. So once the covering is overcome, there is either a glimpse or a momentary experience of that expansion where you get sucked into that collective. I think in this way, you can see this in the process of yoga. The same thing, you can see it also in the process of art. In fact, it is brought about very beautifully by Bharata Muni in his sutra when he says, Vibhava Anubhava Vyabhichari Bhava Sanyogad Rasa Nishpattihi. He uses the word rasa. In fact, I think this is one of the most beautiful explanation that I would feel as the transformation that can be explained at the collective level. There is a performer, there are audience, and performer, he or she is in their own exploration, but while they are exploring it, the entire audience get pulled into that. What the individual is going through is, at least for those few moments, it gets extended to the entire audience. In fact, this is what he calls as rasa. And rasa is not just any kind of aesthetic delight. In fact, Abhinava Gupta extends it further and he says, this is the real true delight of looking or connecting to one's own deeper self, which is nothing but the universal consciousness. So in all these aspects, I think the presence of these three, the Vibhava, something that brings in the main context, then the Anubhava, the main mover or the activity that happens there, and the presence of the Sanchari Bhava, which is nothing but the emotion. I think all the three put together will allow that momentary expansion of that consciousness. So that's where the Rasa Nishpatti, connecting to that collective, happens. And sometimes this is an extensive way of staying at that collective, or it's momentary, you come back to your own experiences. And While this is very well explained in art, I think it's the same process when you're involved in the presence of a guru. There is a presence, there is a trigger, or there is a context in which that expansion is made possible. And or in the practice of a ritual where you participate in it, and just by the very act of being participating in it with your intent as well as the practice, there is a momentary opening that happens. So in that way, all these things would lead towards that rasa nishpatti, which is at the collective level. And I think the same thing, the science has been attempting to understand it through what we call today as mirror neurons, where the action per se and the perception of the act can both lead towards a similar experience. While I'm not participating in an action directly, I'm watching someone else doing this, they say, will allow me to have a similar experience as though, this they have observed it very well in the primates, and they're also extending it through other studies, but there are a lot of views and counter views as well. But nevertheless, it's a very good insight that allows us how by one man's or one individual's experience, how it can get extended to the collective. And that's where you have this 100th monkey experience also. Again, there are many counter views around it, but it says that when an individual monkey got transformed or it learned something new, this was observed in the islands of Japan, in the Koshima monkey tribes, where a monkey started to wash the fruit before it was eating. It's accidentally picked it up because there were a lot of gravels in it, so it was not easy to eat, so it started washing it. And then through that monkey, a critical mass of monkeys learnt it, but that was a formal learning process. They observed it, they started acting upon it. But after a critical mass was reached, there were monkeys in other islands too, which automatically picked this up. And there are no references to say a tribe of monkey swam across and taught these. So there's no reference like that, but just by the very fact that the critical mass was reached, I think it's good enough that the whole population as such was able to pick up that new learning. I think that's where the reaching that critical mass becomes so important, and formal learning up to that level is important. The formal sadhana, that's where it plays a very pivotal role. But after that, or in the other words, it is aspiration till that point, and then it's the descent that happens. So I think in this way, it combines both these approaches from individual to the collective. Yes.
Thank you. Hello. Oh, fine. So we have listened to excellent lectures, and in fact, both are different, but I enjoyed both, especially his anecdote, and he was exactly Aurobindonian in his deliberation. So I would like to come back to the practical side, which Sri Aurobindo explains in the Human Cycle, and most probably page 20 in the old collection, where Sri Aurobindo has a long discussion on the interplay or interaction between individual and society, how it will progress, and how society will move forward with this. And at the beginning, I spoke of Russell and Marx to indicate the two opposites, because Marx was stressing on collectivism and Russell was frantically stressing on individualism. Sri Aurobindo was taking a stance in between as a moderator and also as an illustrator, and taking the old things to the future. Now, what happens when an individual, there's a beautiful apophthegm in the Human Cycle where Sri Aurobindo says, society is only the enlargement of the individual. Society is only the enlargement of the individual. And there he starts, and there is a give and take between the two. Because, like I'm an intellectual, but a motor mechanic, a fisherman, can suddenly speak something to me which enlightens my whole being. So you can afford to ignore none. Everybody is assisting you. That is the secret behind their introduction of collective meditation. Because in a room, wherever I meditate in Shantiniketan, in my center, I see that there are certain days when I am elevated. It is because some persons have come whose consciousness is very high and the vibration is reaching me. Now, this may be science. It is called psychological science by Sri Aurobindo. Now, this psychological science has to be considered also with external science. So, when there is no tussle actually, there is a give and take. And the individual has to be curbed at a certain point where, Sri Aurobindo says, the ego sense, because if the individual is encouraged to an extreme limit, ego will creep in. So he says, no, the ego will adjust with the collective ego. That is the main point of discussion in that page in the human cycle, most probably page 20 in the old book. And there's a give and take because everybody is helping you from outside, not just the intellectual. Even Oscar Wilde has spoken of the fisherman enlightening him. So everybody, these people who were called homosexuals in the past, they were wise people. And I feel bad the way he was virtually killed in England in 1900 when society was progressive enough for one fault, because Wilde was extremely generous and Wilson Knight called him Christ because of his generosity, his Catholicity, his capacity for sacrifice. And they killed him just for one fault, homosexuality. That was awful in England in 1900. So this is what we have to tolerate, and we have to see what we can get in it, not what we cannot get in it. As Sri Aurobindo says in Hindu drama, at the end of Hindu drama, Sri Aurobindo says that the true spirit of criticism is to try to find out what we can get in it, not what we can't get in it. So, this is the peculiar interaction between the mass, the collective, and the individual, where both the parties are enlightened, helped, assisted, modified. Everything becomes a collective work, and the individual also, because the individual leads. I accept Russell's argument in the role of individuality, that the individual leads. Sri Aurobindo accepts that the individual leads, that the individual leads. And individual leads, but it should not affect the collective ego of the society. So once again, there is an overlapping from the life divine. And initially the book was entitled The Psychology of Social Development, not Human Cycle. When Sri Aurobindo serialized the book, it was entitled The Psychology of Social Development, not Human Cycle. That title came much later when the book came into form. So it is a very interesting book because as Life Divine speaks of the spiritual evolution of society, Human Cycle speaks of the sociological evolution of society, though there are overlapping, and at the end, Sri Aurobindo says that no, not all will be supramentalized, but those who will go up will pull those who are standing below. That way society will progress. So that is what I had to say, and there are learned, Anantavai is there, a very learned scholar. But any questions from the audience?
If I can just quickly add to this excellent point. If I remember right, it's been more than 20 years since I read the Life Divine. But I remember clearly the interaction with society that has been beautifully mentioned there in terms of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. And the yoga is in terms of also connecting with the collective, not just connecting with the divine within. And if we see these principles are very important to enable the individual to, ascend in terms of within oneself and also descend in terms of the outer reality. It is like ascent in terms of sushupti, where deep sleep, we are connected with the divine. And descend in terms of the outer reality, where in Jagrat Avastha, all the functionalities are enabled and we are functioning in the world. Now, how do we connect these both? Now, how do we harmonize these both? And that's where principles of Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, generally we realize ourselves as this is me, this is all not me. Now, what is it that is dividing this individual from the collective? Is there a real distinction, if we may? As we go deep within, what we call a samadhi. Samadhi is in terms of this subject-object differentiation is somehow gone. And that was the experience. So it's an experience of deep love. For example, in Tamil, it is said, Anbe Shivam. So love is God. And how do we express it? So love is a principle. Love is God. God is a principle. And we are that already. Now, how do we bring it into the collective force? And that's where, if we look at the layers separating what is called the subject from the object, or this collective reality, is in terms of one of the layers is, for example, our actions, our activities that we perform, by which our identities get reinforced. And hence the principle of Karma Yoga becomes very important to enlighten ourselves as to how do we actuate. Because otherwise we are already that. The Veda Mahavakyas that Sri Aurobindo pointed to already refer to that. But how do we perform in this collective? Because we cannot negate that. And that's where the principles that Sri Aurobindo illustrates beautifully, which illustrates that point for us as well. Bhakti is also something that we see our emotions coloring us, by which we experience a distinction, which is not there in the first place. This is me in terms of my emotions. I'm agitated. And hence, I don't see that, I don't perceive it as me. There is this boundary that exists between me and that which is not me, which is the idea of spiritual, realization, where the spiritual aspect is to be able to enable this boundary to be overcome. And various boundaries separate the individual from the collective, which can be systematically overcome, which is what is called yoga. So, if this is understood in this context, then what Sri Aurobindo and the mother are referring to, there is no difference between the spiritual and the material. It's all grades of the same reality, or if we may, spectrum. You're this end of the spectrum and that end of the spectrum. And that's where appropriate frameworks can be limiting or liberating. If we apply frameworks that limit us in terms of, let's say, actionating or emotionating or intellectualating, those can be extremely limiting frameworks that do not connect with the divine that is. It's not here or there, but that is. And that's where, in the collective process, we see a role of education. For example, Auroville becomes a powerful space for educating any individual if they are connected with the mother's works and Sri Aurobindo's works and living embodiments of those works, which are the disciples, that are here. That becomes a very powerful transforming factor, where, as Vinayji beautifully mentioned, one observes, learns, and it's not just in a classroom space, but it's observation and situating oneself in this context where all these boundary constraints that constrain us as, this is me, this is not me, those get broken down. And hence, the individual being free impacts, huge, collective, if we can say that. For example, in quantum mechanics, if we say space-time, this is called gurutva. The individual who has realized oneself spiritually, and is like a huge mass, a dense mass that actually curves the space-time reality. And more that come in touch with it, and the collective is powerfully transformed by such an individual. Because space-time is not just flat land. There is gurutva. And that comes by the spiritual realization that happens. Now, the collective process can enable that or can move away from that. That's where these educational frameworks that Sri Aurobindo and the mother point towards become very helpful. Now, those frameworks can be rediscovered. Those frameworks exist. Those knowledge-oriented frameworks exist by which we are able to meaningfully connect with who we actually are.
Just inspired to get back to the synthesis of yoga, a section where Sri Aurobindo says that he starts with this premise that yoga is happening in nature itself. It's the whole nature, the whole universe is working towards its evolution. And the choice as an individual is not between committing to yoga or not committing to yoga. Whether I commit willfully or whether I'll be forced to commit myself. So that's the choice. And the moment one commits to yoga, I think the expectation, or rather, the way nature looks at that individual as a conscious collaborator towards her progress. So each individual, this is a kind of relationship between the individual and the collective, each one helping the other in advancing the evolution. As Sri Aurobindo puts again that yoga is nothing but the process through which you accelerate the process of evolution. What could take years and few lifetimes can be done in few years or in few days. So the expectation from the universe or from the collective is that man will be this conscious collaborator. What he or she can do is to push the boundaries far away. So this brings in new possibilities. In fact, if you remember the statement of Armstrong when he landed on the moon, he said, it's a small step for human being, but a giant leap for mankind. So it's one step. But for humanity as a whole, it's a new set of possibilities that is opened up. So what these great teachers, whether Sri Aurobindo, Mother, or such people, when they come, they in fact open up new possibilities. And it's now the collective has to catch up. So possibilities are opened up. The collective as a whole, as a group, it needs to stabilize at that level. And then people such avatars come in and then they again push the frontiers again. So in this way, I see this as a continuous collaboration that is happening, each one building on the other, each one supporting the other and going forward. Of course, there are setbacks that happen, or we seem to see setbacks, but they are just momentary. But as Sri Aurobindo says, this whole process is towards a greater evolution, and that's where the individual plays his or her role.
Thank you. Now, questions from the audience? Yes, please. Arvindanji, yes.
First, it is about that 101 or 100 monkey phenomenon. It has been thoroughly debunked. The particular anthropologists who made that particular study, they came out with the statement that there is no such thing as a morphogenetic field or anything where these kind of things get transmitted. It was by pure primate cultural diffusion. It was Lyle Watson, a popular science writer and a good biologist though. He was the one who kind of distorted the study and presented it as a proof for morphogenetic field. That is number one. Number two, you talked about the mirror neurons. Sir. The mirror neurons, of course, are very important. In fact, they relate to this phenomenon called empathy, which we call anukampam. And that V.S. Ramachandran, who has been promoting this particular view, has said that this is the basis of our civilization itself. Now, in our culture that surrounds Auroville, actually, okay, there is a story that relates this particular mirror neuron concept to the nature of spiritual experience. We all know that story, perhaps. When Vaigai was in flood, Shiva comes and instead of doing his labor, he gets a lot of puttu from the old lady and eats. Then the king comes and he gets angry and he beats Shiva. Then the pain of that beating is felt by everybody. Okay, everybody. It is felt by everybody. But when he was eating that puttu, that sweet dish, that sweetness was not felt by everybody. Okay, That is the basis of spirituality, and that is what connects the individual and the society, right? So we have that famous Vaishnava Janado song. It starts like that, right? That a true Vaishnava is one who feels the pain of others. So this mirror neuron, empathy-based mirror neuron thing actually limits to that feeling the pain of others, whereas the spiritual experience itself is highly individualistic, right? But this culture again has evolved tools to spread this spiritual experience. Like, for example, you cannot have a Tendulkar from a place where millions of people were not playing cricket. Only if millions of people are playing cricket, you will have a Tendulkar, right? The same way, you can have a spiritual servant only when there is a spiritual culture. And that culture has been created here earlier, right? Even as children, we have learned, for example, there is Vinayak Ragaval, where some of the most subtle science of yoga has been taught to us as, say, 5-year, 6-year-old children, okay? And as Aurobindo, it cannot remain in isolation as an experiment. It has to become a kind of develop porous boundaries through which this cultural and spiritual osmosis happens with the surrounding spiritual culture. And if that happens, already there has been a system evolved to impart us the relation between the collective and the individual in this culture. That can be imbibed here, and then it can accelerate the whole thing.
Just to add to this, that's where culture, what we say, if we look at it as samskriti, these are samskaras, that means, best practices that are evolved over a long period of time. So every organization has best practices. Civilizations also have best practices, which are called the culture of that organization or culture of that land or civilization. That's where the principles everyone understands. Love is God, we are all that divine essence. All of that is fine. But that's where the cultural expressions, those are what provide that robustness for that expression to happen. That is what I think Aurobindoji is also pointing at, where there is an existing cultural basis for spiritualized expressions. And those can be taught. That way, adopting those expressions become very easy and straightforward. For example, I have applied a vibhuti. This is called a vibhuti or tirunir. So this is a nanomedicine in Siddha literature. So this is prepared through specific process. This is kept in the garbhagriha of temples and then charged, energized, and then given as prasada. Only specific material are given. How is this a random phenomena? So these are best practices that are evolved over a period of time through valid scientific research. These are not necessarily modern scientific frameworks. I'm using science in a broader sense. So these are evolved and then expressed. But obviously, this is a user's perspective. Now, how many of us have gotten educated systematically along these lines to be able to understand that this is the usage? Just like we use a mobile phone. We are all users of it. Very few actually study, do a PhD, and can engineer it, can participate in co-creating a mobile phone. So that is where the role of education is very, very important, where these cultural frameworks, which are best practices, which have been evolved over a long period of time, those are systematically taught. And that benefits everybody in a very quick manner. Otherwise, those can also distance us, where most of us, for example, as a child, I had peer pressure to rub it off. So I would step out of the home and rub it off because people did not understand what this meant. Later, since I had an awakening, I could understand, I could discover the principles of Siddha literature by which I could, so Vinayak Agaval and so on, those all are wealth of knowledge which can be taught to children, to young people.
Please raise your hand. Acha, you speak first.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you so much for the conversation. It was very, very enlivening. My question is that you spoke about the aspirational framework, that is kind of set and that creates the cultural fabric for individuals to rise and individuals kind of their own experiences and practices, in a sense, expands that framework. And I often struggle with this, that the current framework of aspiration in society, which in a sense, drew from the Western Enlightenment and the industrial worldview, and that set us on the material accumulative path that we spoke of yesterday. So my question is that how do you engage with the current collective framework that may not be in line with individual experiences that we would like to practice and embody more? And second, how do you engage with individuals for whom that collective framework is really important and they are practicing in their own individual realm to further that collective framework? And it can be applied to like industrial worldview versus spiritual worldview, also religions, also, like political leanings, etc. So that's a question.
This is a very important point, especially many young people look at this, and this can be a source of great trauma, where you're not able to harmonize it. This is called samadhana chitta. Samadhana chitta means you arrive at a harmonious understanding within yourselves, which allows you to exist. Otherwise, this can be extremely traumatic. And that's where I wish to share a personal anecdote. We regularly take people on Himalayan yatra. In one such yatra, there was a landslide, and we were stuck in a traffic jam. And there was an old lady, apparently employed by the government, to break stones to clear it off, so that we can, the traffic can flow. It's a very simple process, arduous process, but it keeps happening all the time. I approached the lady. I was very inspired by her. Somehow I felt her attitude to be powerful. So I approached her and asked her, Maji, aap kahan se hain? Mother, where are you from? I'm from a nearby village. From when have you been doing this? I've been doing it from childhood. आप ये क्यों करती हैं? Why do you do this? She straight answered me saying, ताकि आप घर पहुंचें, खुशी रहें, so that you can reach back home safely and you should be happy. See, this kind of an answer I have not found amongst meditators. I ask them, why do you meditate? They say, I'm struggling. I don't, give me some tools. Or business people, why do you do business? What to do, So that's where we have such philosophical frameworks like dharma, artha, kama. These are all frameworks that can be very powerful because this sets the intention. Now, if you analyze her intention, she could have said, "Hey, chal hat," but no, she could have shooed me away because she's irritated. I'm breaking stones. You're just, enjoying. She did not do that. If you're meditating, someone asks us something. No, we would look at everyone as a threat. So even meditation as an activity, we need to look at the intention behind that activity, which can be liberating or limiting. Any activity for that matter. So she could have said, I do this, but these government wallas force me to do this. I'm constrained by this environment and hence I have to do this. Many people can live like that. I'm doing this for fear of boss, for fear of spouse maybe, sometimes that also happens. So it could be any factor that drives you. She could have said, I'm doing this so that my grandchildren can have food, education. I need to earn, otherwise I cannot survive. She did not choose any of that. She chose the intention that for your benefit, I'm doing this. Likewise, when we approach it in our lives, then that is a powerful healing intention, where why do I do what I do? That can be, that's the aspiration aspect. The aspiration is in your hands. You can aspire for dharma. It's called aram seiya virumbu. That means you develop an affinity for performing dharma. Through anything, you could be sweeping, you could be cooking, you could be breathing, you could be meditating, you could also be in your role performing, various things in society. That is not a constraint. What you do is not the constraint. Why do you do what you do? That is where it can be limiting or liberating. And this is also appropriate knowledge framework that people are taught and educated on. So if that is not taught, to figure this out is non-trivial.
Yeah, I think we can just give to him and then Madhu.
There is also, there is.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I'll give it to you. Yeah, very short question. Wonderful discourse. But when you look at our Sanskriti is entirely supported by the mother, by the feminine. And I find that the role of the feminine in the collective, and also mother is here, is far more important than abstract theories. Because if you remove the feminine qualities of compassion, of giving, and this wonderful episode that you just said, there can be really no proper collective. And wonderful that you quoted Sankhya, but Sankhya erases the feminine totally. Prakriti is, I'm sorry. I mean, I have no problem with that, but it's a great philosophy. But so how do you sort of, look at these questions in terms of society, people, Because the woman's culture in India, I mean, starting from the village culture, the tribal culture, the urban culture, and starting from the oldest women are really the first food makers, the first potters. So how do you, I think somewhere, and mother is sitting here, when mother came, everything changed, because there was a balance between the male and female. So I think that part is very important in this discussion. Thank you.
That is very true. In fact, you called beautifully the mother. So we associate the feminine with mother. That means awakening that motherhood, irrespective of the gender, is so very important in society now. Now that is what is missing, and hence that is what needs to be addressed through appropriate education. Because if that motherhood is not awakened in each individual, all of us have the power to be Annai. Annai, in Tamil it's said, the mother. And that awakening of that motherhood, irrespective of the gender, becomes such an important calling. So thank you so much for pointing that out.
May I? Thank you. Very beautifully, it's been mentioned over and over again that education is very important. And things have been talked about, not taught, talked about the frameworks. The gentleman at the back also just gave that glimpse. What I am asking is a very specific question. In India, I am an educator. There is no such framework wherein, a simple line of actions can be taught to persons from a small age. And I'm not saying that I'm talking about a school in Aurobindo. No, because factually speaking, even in India, there is the school of Aurobindo, which is very secluded. Like, I'm lucky that I'm over here right now, right? But how to have that framework of what you are saying? Because there is this Himalayas, they are secluded over there. Like, there are people like in Orissa, they are secluded over there. There are people in Gujarat, they are secluded over there. Where is that framework? That can be standardized. Everyone, like if I'm teaching chemistry in my laboratory, I'm teaching chemistry in my classroom, it's the same chemistry which is being taught in USA. Because the frameworks are set. That this is how you are going to set. Maybe the syllabuses may differ as per the universities, that's fine. But such spiritual frameworks are not, I'm really sorry to say, they are not there. What can be done about it? So that first we ourselves get educated as educators so that we can educate the others. We cannot be the mother unless and until we have been taught how to be the mother. So how to do that?
Yeah. This is a very important question that he has asked. Thanks to him for asking that. For example, Vinayji is working at the higher education level, where higher education in Indian knowledge systems, for example. So these knowledge systems exist. Ancient knowledge systems exist. Now we are more towards modern knowledge systems, and hence we are trying to rediscover it. Otherwise, the knowledge systems exist. So we are not without a context, so to speak. For example, in Tamil Nadu, the knowledge exists. It's the textual knowledge. This is not vague, mystical knowledge, not in Himalayas. This is textual knowledge that is simply there for one to study, take up and study and figure it out. So higher education exists. Now, what happens with the modern schooling system? We work at the level of K-12 education. So we work with National Institute of Open Schooling, we work with NCERT, CBSE, and so on. So there, what we find is that, now with the new education policy, IKS is being introduced, Indian knowledge systems are being introduced. These are very standardized, rigorous frameworks that are introduced. It's very straightforward to receive it. We have some publications as which, if you're interested in viewing it after the session. So what I'm mentioning is that these knowledge systems exist, and the source text also exist. It's just for one to access it. It's as simple as that. No, so thank you for.
would like to.
Actual knowledge exists. So he can talk about.
Reframe the question, what is there in my mind. Is it necessary that the individual should become the individual first, where it becomes that gravity, so that everyone gets pulled in? Or it is important for everyone to become that individual, so that all everyone more can get in?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, beautiful. Thanks for clarifying. So this is a very important question that we face. Should the individual grow first or should the collective grow first? That's the chicken and egg problem. But that's where you cannot solve it being chicken and egg. You'll have to look down at the evolutionary
Just an intervention, because I felt like intervening. Individual is always progressive. Individual is the collective progressive. Sri Aurobindo says in the ideal of human unity. Individual is the collective progressive. So individual is always ahead. No question about that. But he has to learn a lot of things about collective living, about getting inspiration, getting ideas, vibrations from the mass. But Sri Aurobindo is very specific, and also Russell, that individual is the conscious progressive. It leads. So you have to give him a special importance, but he should not be as egoistic as to affect the growth of the collective, which is also important.
Just like to come in briefly, being part of the formal education system, being part of non-formal education system, and also being part of the policy making with the new national education policy, which I was part of taking care of humanities education and language education. I would like to say this much, that, of course, at the individual level, it was always been possible. Like, there was no difficulty at individual level to bring in some of these frameworks. With all the structural limitations, yes, many people have done astonishing jobs. But now with the new national education policy, I think even the collective has opened up a little bit. There are possibilities. There are certain elements that have been brought into the national education policy, which I am sure would complement the individual effort. So I think this is the right time, if we were to do any experimentation, to push the possibilities ahead. I think both are now working together. So individual and the collective happened because of the individual aspirations. So there were many individuals have been trying different kinds of things for last 25, 30, 40 years. And because of that so many individuals working together, it reflected in the education policy, which is a collective aspiration. So I think in this way, we'll need to see things.
Thank you for that. This is the last question before we...
Yes, he was telling that Sri Aurobindo is standing between Russell and Marx. Should we look it as he is standing in between, or he is standing about and integrating those two things? How it should be looked?
Actually, these are two opposing views. Russell was deadly against communism. And communism always tries to suppress the individual. And they always prefer the collective. They think this is democracy. But both are wrong in a sense that Russell is encouraging individual to be egoistic with the new ideas always. He must have a check line where he should stop. Because ego is a dangerous thing for the individual. And every artist is egoistic, except for the mother and Sri Aurobindo and Nolikanto Gupta. Every artist is egoistic. So that will affect the collective. There he must stop. So Russell is there. And Marx was totally against anything intuitive, anything which enlarges the self, because man does not live by bread alone. So it was, Sri Aurobindo accepts it, that well, the collective is important, economy is important, everything is important, but you cannot curb the individual. And on the other side, the individual should not, this is a balance which he is making. He is a moderator, but at the same time, he is taking both the ideas for the future. And that is what is there in the human cycle. And in fact, the whole book is important for that. I have said that it was initially entitled, when it was serialized in the Arya, it was initially titled The Psychology of Social Development. Then it was changed to Human Cycle. I think the Human Cycle is a better title, because it speaks of the evolution of society with reference to psychology of man.
Thank you for that. So, yes, the chicken and egg situation continues, whether it's the individual or the collective. But what I heard here is that the individual at the core has the seed of the collective consciousness. It's covered with layers. I might be simplifying it really very this, but it is up to us, and I would say it's up to my responsibility how much I delayer this to allow that to really unfold. And then take along with others, just like today morning when we were in the form witnessing the dance, or we were listening to the vibrations, there was a sudden unveiling that happened, dropping off the barrier, and that just became one consciousness. So maybe that's what it is. And the path shown by Sri Aurobindo, the mother, and like, is that they show the light on the path that we walk. I think we just have to hold, do our work, like he said, karma yoga, continue to grow within, and then take people along. Differences will come along. There's no possibilities. Only when friction happens, there is a wisdom, there is a delayering. There is an unlearning and a new learning happening at the same time. So if I can summarize on that level, and yes, frameworks will evolve. And I like the line that you said, that the individual is a conscious progression. And with that, we conclude today's morning session, and we progress to the dining hall, where the food awaits you. So again, today we have made an effort to bring in Aurobillion food. It's very different. I hope you like it. It is sushi, which is vegan and different flavors, and lasagna. So the idea is that you enjoy that food as well and honoring it. And we come back sharp at 2:15? Yeah, 2:15, where we begin with chant, and then we have a connection of heart between Dina and Krishnadas and us in the audience. So thank you so much. Thank you.